You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have a real insider show for you today. First, we go inside that memorable sit-in by Democrats in the House of Representatives in their attempt to pass gun control legislation, and we go there through the eyes of someone who was there, the great legendary Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Next, we go inside the offices of district attorneys to discover what goes wrong and what could go right with prosecuting crimes of sexual violence that involve drugging the victim. Last, we go inside the landmark year 1969 to 1970 with the author of a dynamic new book on that historic year. But first, before anything else, we need to go inside someplace else, inside the headlines. One major headline this week was President Obama's rousing first campaign appearance with Hillary Rodham Clinton in North Carolina. And though certainly it was about legacy and politics, it was also about vision and grace. And it was an extraordinarily moving moment, especially for those of us whose hearts have bled for decades every time gender and race have been pitted against each other in the history of this country. Another major headline involved the FBI conclusion of its investigation into HRC's emails while she was Secretary of State. As you know by now, the FBI Director, James Comey, threw an unexpected press conference to announce himself the findings, rather than have that announcement come from the Justice Department as normal procedure. In part, this was because Comey is famously independent, but also doubtless because he wanted to protect the reputation of the FBI for utter impartiality. In the troubled wake of the unfortunate chance meeting between former President Bill Clinton and sitting Attorney General Loretta Lynch, a meeting which the nicknamed Big Dog Bill sure as hell should have known better than to initiate, given the optics that Hillary haters would have a heyday with, well, that meeting, where Clinton and Lynch talked golf and grandkids, unintentionally fueled the GOP trash Hillary machine. You know, as an aside, and as someone who frequently had to explain various misstatements and regrettable actions by a former husband, I personally am pretty damn tired of Bill Clinton's gaffes, and even tireder of his wife's being blamed for them. Anyway, it turns out that FBI Director Comey, himself a Republican who formerly worked for Rudy Giuliani, did us all a favor by his individual precedent-breaking announcement in which he did chastise HRC for, quote, carelessness regarding the email server, but definitively stated that no sensible prosecutor in the land would consider such behavior an indictable offense. This should, finally, once and for all, end the email controversy. Time after time, over decades, in fact, Hillary Rodham Clinton has been accused falsely of everything from bad hairdos to murder. Time after time, little things like facts and evidence have proven her innocent, yet the steady drumming of false accusations continued because, as Nazi propagandist Goebbels once noted, two things count in propaganda and lying. The lie has to be big and audacious, and the lie has to be repeated again and again and again. So, of course, Donald Trump and the GOP are dismissing the FBI report as wrong, corrupt, even illegal, with no grounds to back up their argument, but hey, why should that stop them? If HRC was found culpable, grounds for attack. If, as is the case, HRC is found innocent, grounds for attack. Then again, we've been here before. What was called the Burning Time in continental Europe and the British Isles lasted approximately 600 years, peaking in the 16th and 17th centuries, but persisting well into the 18th and the so-called Enlightenment. It focused on persecutions of women and girls as witches, women and girls who could read, write, act as healers or midwives, or who simply managed not to marry, or who were perceived as rebellious. Entire nunneries were accused and slaughtered. Catholic Poland burned alive its last witch as late as 1793, the year George Washington held his first cabinet meeting, and ideological battles between the Reformation and Counter-Reformation literally fed the flames, with newly minted Protestants competing with Catholics for the most fundamentalist interpretation of the Bible. I've written at length about this in my historical novel, The Burning Time. Its relevance here is that the most common witch trial involved binding an accused woman's hands and feet together and throwing her into a lake. If she drowned, she must have been innocent. Oops! If she didn't drown, then she must have wrought magic, thus guilty, and thus burned at the stake. A real win-win for the prosecutorial inquisitors, don't you think? Nevertheless, and despite the best efforts of Tweeter Trump, Hillary has been cleared of any email misdeeds. Of course, it would be naive to think that the current self-destructive Republican leadership would now join her in arguing policy instead of slurs and smears. But she and we will march on. And as we do, we'll look back over our shoulders and note that the newspaper USA Today recently reported that in 2006, when a judge in a lawsuit over Donald Trump's casino operations ordered Trump to hand over several years' worth of emails, the answer shocked the judge. The Trump Organization routinely erased emails and had no records from 1996 to 2001. That is 5 years' worth of vanished emails, which amounts to destruction of evidence. What do you say to that, boys? And now it's time for my first guest. She's a returnee to this program, to my great pleasure. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is now in her 13th term as the Congresswoman for the District of Columbia. She is the ranking member of the House Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, and she serves on 2 other committees, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, much needed, and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Eleanor was the first woman to chair the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and she came to Congress already a national figure who had been a civil rights and feminist leader and a tenured professor of law and board member at 3 Fortune 500 companies. She has been named one of the 100 most important American women in one survey and one of the most powerful women in Washington in another. She's the recipient of more than 50 That's 50 honorary degrees, and she is a friend from way back in the days of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, in the Civil Rights Movement. It's my great pleasure to welcome back Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Dear Eleanor, welcome back to the program. It's such an honor always to have you here.
Good to be with you, Robin.
There's so many things I want to ask you. Okay, first of all, let's start with the shocking but glorious moment of the sit-in. Shades of the years when you and I first met in the civil rights movement. The sit-in on the floor of the House in the well over gun legislation. I know you were a part of that. Was it as amazing as it looked?
Well, it was because of the protocol of the House. You can't even talk out of turn in the House, much less sit in the House. Yeah. But it does tell you how far polarization in our country and in our politics has come, that you can't even get a vote on something that 95% of the American people say they want. Remember what this was about. No buy, no fly means you can't buy a gun if you're on the terrorist watch list. And here's another one that the great majority of the American people are for. Background checks. We've got background checks if you go to buy a gun from a dealer. But here in the District of Columbia, which I represent, which has the strongest gun safety laws in the country, you need only go across the line to Virginia, and they'll sell you a gun at a gun show, or out of the back of somebody's trunk of his car.
It's crazy.
Completely undermining local gun safety laws. So what you need, obviously, is a national law.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just insane. Well, there was a rumor on the news, but I don't know if it's a real thing or not, that Paul Ryan had been so besieged by the tweets and the email we were sending them. There's a rumor that when the Congress reconvenes, that he might let something to do with guns come to the floor, but God knows what that will be.
Well, there are many kinds of things you could do, short even of what we're asking for. For example, when the Senate had their filibuster, and remember, we can't do something like that in the House.
Right.
We have what you call regular order. They did a filibuster, and a Republican there has been working on a bill that would say, for example, for background checks, you need 14. You could have 14 days to check to see if the person should in fact get a gun. So if you went, for example, to a gun show, that would apply to the gun show. Now I'll tell you the difference that would have meant. We call it today the Charleston loophole. The man who got that gun bought it from a dealer.
Yeah.
But since the NRA controls guns and not the Congress of the United States, the law says that you have 3 days to check. Well, there's such a backlog that nobody can get through in 3 days. Therefore, he got his gun, and he went into a sanctuary and killed 10 people.
Slaughtered people praying. My God. Yeah. Well, the sit-in was a bonny and wonderful thing, and I congratulate you and obviously John Lewis and everybody who participated. It was thrilling to see it.
John and I are the last refuge of SNCC.
Yep.
But we thought we had left our sit-in days when we left SNCC, and here we find ourselves sitting in as members of the Congress of the United States.
Yeah.
Never dreamed that would happen.
No, I'm sure not. And the excuse me, and the bones are a little creakier now, but you got down and you got up and you got down and you got up again. And I was
that I can still do, yeah.
I was just hunched over in front of my set, laughing and crying and tweeting. So I want to ask you also, tap into your wisdom about the election, I know you're on the platform committee. And what should we expect, or how is that going, or how are your general feelings about that entire scene in this utterly bizarre election year?
Well, fortunately, there are not huge differences between the two leaders, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So the drafting committee has already met and come forward with a draft. Now, we on the platform committee can change that in any way with amendments. The platform can't be discussed much before then, but I can tell you that there is strong language supporting statehood for the District of Columbia in the platform.
Yay!
And that is right, and that comes not only because we, of course, press that for Democrats to do that. She actually wrote an op-ed strongly supporting statehood before the D.C. primaries. So I think we're going to have a statehood advocate in the White House itself.
Wow.
President Obama has, of course, endorsed statehood. Bill Clinton actually helped me get a statehood bill to the floor when I first came to Congress, and we got 2/3 of the Democrats. But President Obama has not been as strong on statehood as I now see Hillary Clinton being. So we are very much looking forward to her becoming the President of the United States.
You bet. I don't think some of my listeners, even in the United States, given our educational system on what used to be called civics, which has now disappeared, and I don't think my international listeners will necessarily know, but the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., has been in effect disenfranchised in Congress. It has limited self-government, and Eleanor is its sole representative in Congress. She can, correct me if I'm wrong here, introduce legislation. She can sit on committees. She can lobby other Congress people, but you can't.
I can vote in committees. I can vote in committees, head committees. But when bills go to the floor for that final vote, I cannot vote on bills. It's not always been statehood. we've been in the majority. I have been in the majority almost for most of the years I've been in Congress, and there was a good Republican, Representative Tom Davis, who's since retired, who was for a House vote, and he and I worked together because Utah had just missed getting a House vote, and Utah voted to pair with the district. And do you know we could not get that, even though it would have been a wash? Neither Democrats nor Republicans could have claimed that as a victory. So you see, we have tried everything.
Yeah.
So now we're just going for it. That we didn't get that vote. That would only have been a vote on the House floor.
Yeah.
It would have been no senators. Today we have no senators.
Yeah.
So we have only a voting what I'm called delegate or congresswoman, either one.
Wow.
But what it means is that if something goes to the House floor affecting the District of Columbia, as is often the case,
yeah,
everyone can vote on it except the representative of the District of Columbia.
That's insane. I mean, and residents of the district pay taxes. I mean, it really is representation.
Well, the taxes, here's another factoid for you. Not only does the district, which has blossomed and has a huge surplus now of $2 billion, but the district pays the highest taxes, income taxes, per capita of any state in the Union.
Oh my God! Time for tea in the harbor with shouting "No taxation without representation." I mean,
absolutely, Robin. Yeah. Absolutely,
Eleanor. All right. Well, you're feeling good about the elections at this point. I mean, we're all doing what we can. Tell us more about what we should be doing. By the way, tell listeners what they can do to help in terms of D.C. statehood.
In terms of D.C. statehood, it seems to me whenever you see anything remotely involving statehood come, you should write whoever's the president of the United States, because I think there's very little that can be done until we get the kind of bully pulpit that I think Hillary Clinton is going to give us.
Okay.
I do think there's a caution that needs to be put forward when it comes to the presidential election. Donald Trump should not be even close in this election, and he, in fact, is a real contender.
It's terrifying.
So the fact that Hillary Clinton has been ahead in recent polls should make us work harder.
Yep.
Not put us at ease.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the taking it too lightly or laughing it off. Look what happened with Brexit. So that should come.
Yes.
This is not funny. This is terrifying.
It isn't.
Terrifying. Oh, so thank you for your usual great wisdom and humor, and keeping on. And we'll look for you at the Democratic Convention. We'll spy you out. I'm sure you're going to be a delegate. And
I'll be there, Robin, and I'll look for you too.
All right, my dear. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make it, but if I don't, I'll be rooting at home. And if you have to sit in the floor again, by God, I'll come down to Washington and stand outside and cheer with a big sign saying, "I love Eleanor and give D.C. statehood." Thank you.
That's what we need.
Thank you
All right,
so much.
Thank you, Robin.
It's time for a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And did you know that just like all politics is local, that famous Tip O'Neill statement, so is all criminal justice system politics local, meaning you can have an effect on them. Stay tuned for my next guest.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. Jane Manning, my next guest, has been on the program before. She is a major advocate for women's rights to end violence against women. In 1992, she was a lead organizer of the Coalition to End Violence Against Women, which led a rally of 5,000 demonstrators to the steps of the Democratic National Convention, urging passage of the Violence Against Women Act. And while working for Equality Now, the International Women's Rights Organization, she was the architect of New York State's law against human trafficking. Now she's back with yet another front to fight on. Jane Manning, welcome back to the program, Jane.
Thank you, Robin.
You're doing another important thing in an ongoing parade of important things. You're a former chapter president, of course, of National Organization for Women, New York City chapter.
Yes.
But now you're the director of advocacy for that chapter, and you're doing amazing stuff. You have a history of wins behind you that always heartens me in terms of feminist organizing, because you began as a prosecutor focusing on domestic violence and child abuse and sex crimes.
Yes.
But then when you were in private practice, you represented a coalition of battered women's organizations, and you were the ones for them who advocated for reversal of a New York State court decision that made it easier for men who murdered wives or girlfriends to invoke extreme emotional disturbance as a defense, and the state's highest court ruled unanimously in your and your client's favor. So
that's exactly right.
I'm very glad that you're now taking on drug-facilitated sexual assault, DFSA. Tell the listeners what that is and why it's so important.
Yeah, I will. Our campaign against drug-facilitated sexual assault grows out of an ongoing campaign that we have called Take Rape Seriously. And really this campaign is the brainchild of our wonderful chapter president, Sonia Osorio, who is the president of New York City now and also New York State now. And this campaign has been going on for a while, but our latest focus is on drug-facilitated sexual assault. And we're working with some young women who were victims of this horrific crime, in that they were out with friends, drinking socially, kind of consuming a normal social amount of alcohol, and someone slipped a drug into their drink, and a predator was able to isolate them and get them to a place where they couldn't be protected and were raped. Yeah, it's a horrific experience.
It's also the Bill Cosby scenario, and it's
exactly that scenario.
It's the most common scenario on campus rape, which itself is an epidemic.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So drug-facilitated rape would also include rapes facilitated by alcohol, which is a drug. And it would include not only a scenario where a predator drugs a victim without her knowledge, but also a scenario where a young woman who may not be terribly experienced with alcohol is intoxicated or incapacitated by alcohol, and she is deliberately singled out and targeted by a sexual predator.
And it makes it harder to prosecute, doesn't it? Or it used to.
It does make it harder to prosecute. There are some unique challenges associated with these cases, but Robin, what we're seeing is that the biggest obstacle to successful prosecution is not the inherent difficulty of these cases, it's a lack of will to prosecute them in our police departments and our district attorney's offices. And so we are trying to push the criminal justice system to treat rape and sexual assault as the violent felony crimes that they are, and to approach these cases with a problem-solving approach. Yes, there are difficulties associated with the cases, but in many cases, those are difficulties that can be overcome. So one common difficulty of prosecuting drug-facilitated crimes is that by the time the victim gets to the hospital, it's too late to recover the drug in her bloodstream. Many of these predators are so savvy about the drugs that they choose, and they will deliberately choose substances like GHB that are metabolized very quickly out of the body. So by the time the victim is conscious and figures out what has happened to her, gets herself to a hospital, waits, goes through the intake process, and eventually has blood and urine drawn, it is too late to find any traces of that drug.
So the evidence disappears.
So the evidence disappears.
Oh, my God. I didn't realize that about roofies. I did not know that. Go on.
And it's because perpetrators are deliberately choosing drugs that will disappear quickly, or in some cases are choosing drugs that have been just newly synthesized in these illegal amateur labs, basically, that are drugs that are synthesized to mimic the effects of familiar drugs, but that have a different molecular profile. So that when her blood and her urine are tested by a medical examiner or a police lab, they don't find the drug that was used because they haven't even developed a test yet for that drug. There's no generic test for sort of foreign substances in the bloodstream. So it's really important for victims of this crime and their advocates and law enforcement to understand that the fact that you didn't find a drug doesn't mean a drug wasn't used.
Right.
Now, the good news is there are ways to overcome this problem. So, for example, in some cases, you can take samples of the victim's hair because a drug will be retained in the hair long after it has disappeared from the blood and urine. And some drugs, if they're given in a sufficiently high dose, can be detected in the hair. That's one way you can try to solve the problem. Another way, though, is that you can call an expert witness at trial called a drug recognition expert, and there are some wonderful experts in this field. That's some really good news. People who are really conscientious and caring professionals. Some of them are toxicologists. Some of them are former narcotics cops who are trained to recognize drugs by their symptomology, and they can take the witness stand and say, based on the symptoms experienced by this victim, those symptoms are consistent with consumption of a drug in this category, a drug that was a dissociative anesthetic or a drug that was whatever category matches the symptoms. And jurisdictions that have been courageous enough to try cases using drug recognition expert testimony have had a lot of success at trial and have been able to convict offenders.
So why then is there still resistance? Because you can begin to rescue evidence, and you can show a track record that when they do try such cases, they have a pretty good chance of winning. I mean, is it still the prosecutorial reluctance to believe the woman?
Yes, is the answer.
Oh, my God.
We've still got a long way to go in this department. You know, some people will say, well, prosecutors don't like to try difficult cases because it brings down their conviction rate. And there's some truth to that. But the other part of the truth is that when it comes to burglary cases or robbery cases or homicide cases, prosecutors will still take those difficult cases.
What do you know? Yeah.
What do you know?
What do you know?
And, in the district, as you know, I'm a former prosecutor, and in the DA's office where I worked, we had a gung-ho attitude about prosecuting car theft. If a case of car theft came in front of you, you knew that there was an executive at the highest level of the office that you had to run that case by before you could have permission to offer a plea bargain in that case.
Interesting.
The same attitude did not apply to rape or child molesting or domestic violence, in which plea bargains could be had really easily. And the reason for that is that the district attorney that I worked for was hearing constantly from the community about their concern with car theft. He would go to community meetings, and his constituents would show up at community meetings, and they would ask him what he was doing about car theft. It was a problem in the county. People were really concerned about it. They made their voices heard, and they made themselves a political force to be reckoned with, and the results showed. Feminists and women's advocates can do the same thing, each of us, in our own local communities. The criminal justice system is a localized enterprise. So DAs and police departments answer to the specific cities or towns that they operate in. Politics of criminal justice really are local. And the good news about that is that a relatively small number of concerned citizens can really have their voices heard by asking for a meeting with a district attorney, by asking for a meeting with a chief of police or with the head of the sex crimes unit in your local police department. And you can do this just as a general concern and go ask them to tell you what they're doing about these cases, or you can follow news reports in your community, and if you come across a case where it sounds like a sexual predator wasn't taken seriously or a case of sexual violence wasn't handled appropriately, ask for a meeting.
I mean, that really is encouraging. Give the website of New York City Now so that people can go there and find out more about the project of Take Rape Seriously and about DFSA.
Sure, it's nownyc.org, NOWNYC.org.
And we've been talking with wonderful Jane Manning. Thank you, Jane, for all that you do and have done for years and still do and do brilliantly. And thanks for being with us again on Women's Media Center Live. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robin.
And now it's time to pop into the Surrealism Corner. We have two items this week, both about sex. So there's a sex education textbook published in China, which was approved by a provincial education department, and it has led to quite an outcry on social media. The textbook says things like, young women who have sex before marriage are degenerates, and a girl who gives her body for love will make the boy who conquers her love her less, and premarital sex has a tremendous negative psychological and physical impact on girls. Well, outraged by this text, one of the teachers posted photos of the text on Weibo, which is China's equivalent of Twitter, and it unleashed a firestorm of comments. The teacher said, "I was so angry when I read this. The concepts are backward and all the negative comments are directed toward girls." Another Weibo user said, "This makes me sick. As a man, I can't stand this. Since you want women not to have premarital sex, then please tell all the boys to do the same." Yeah, there you go. And another claimed that the publisher should name itself the 18th Century Publishing Group. Apparently, in addition to fears about the harm that such attitudes inflict on girls, the online reaction reflected concern about the general lack of sex education in China, because teenagers often talk about how their parents explained to them when they were little that they had emerged from armpits or even from trash cans. That doesn't seem a very friendly thing for a parent to say. In any event, the antiquated attitude of the school system is not keeping up with the sexual revolution in reality in China. A 2012 survey showed that 70% of Chinese had had premarital sex, up from just 15% of those surveyed in 1989. A women's rights advocate, Zhao Meili, said that the text reflected, quote, "a common idea among the Chinese public, the same in Western countries in ancient times. To solve sexual problems, try abstinence," close quote. Good for her, except that there are places in the United States that still recommend abstinence, and it's not ancient times. Well, moving right along to somebody else who's upset, apparently, by sex, we go to Vatican City. Did you see that coming? I bet you did. Former Pope Benedict says in his memoirs, which will be coming out in September, that no one pressured him to resign. He resigned for health reasons, but he does allege that a so-called gay lobby in the Vatican had tried to influence decisions. That's what a leading newspaper in Italy has reported. He claims that he promised to remain hidden to the world, and so that's why he's been living in a former convent in the Vatican Gardens, although I must say that writing a memoir is not the best way to remain hidden to the world. But in 2013, of course, he became the first pope in 6 centuries to resign because of lots of scandals. The VatiLeaks case, in which his butler leaked some of his personal letters and other documents, and also there were allegations of corruption and a power struggle in the Vatican. So it seems to me that if the so-called gay lobby was behind those leaks or behind the allegations of corruptions and exposing the corruptness in the Vatican, good for the gay lobby. He claims that he managed to break up this power group made up of 4 or 5 people who were gay and were seeking to influence Vatican decisions. Apparently, he also says in the memoir that he admits his lack of resoluteness in governing. There's an understatement. And that he was surprised when the Cardinals chose Francis as his successor in 2013. I can bet. It's just, in China or in the Vatican, the sex, let's face it, is surreal. Time for another quick pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And do you know which year it was during which America lost its mind but gained its soul? Well, stay tuned to find out from my next very interesting guest.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. My next guest, Clara Bingham, is a former Newsweek White House correspondent, and her writing has appeared in Vanity Fair, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Monthly, and many other publications. She produced the 2011 documentary, The Last Mountain, and she's here to talk about her new book, Witness to the Revolution. Clara Bingham. Clara, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
I have to start by not only celebrating this book, but with full disclosure, listeners, I'm in it. It is called Witness to the Revolution, with a wonderful subtitle: Radicals, Resistors, Vets, Hippies, and the Year America Lost Its Mind and Found Its Soul, by Clara Bingham. And I think I'm certainly not a vet or a hippie, but I was one of the radicals. So I am quoted in the book, which is an honor. And it's a terrific book. Tell us about Witness to the Revolution and how you came to do this extraordinary, huge work.
Well, Robin, actually, you're not just quoted in the book. I begin the book and end it with your quotes, because they encapsulate the feeling of the time so well. So I hope your readers all can go out and buy it. And if we have time, I'd love to actually read one of your quotes that I started the book with, which I thought was really great. This is a book about the school year of 1969-70, and it's an oral history narrative. So I interviewed 100 people who were involved in different parts of the movement for social change in the late 60s, and tried to recreate events that took place during this incredibly tumultuous year, beginning in August of 69, ending in August of 70, which I believe was the crescendo of the 60s to some extent, and
Right.
It certainly was a perfect storm of rebellion.
Yeah, it was one hell of a busy year.
And I feel as if I missed it. I was born in 1963, so I wrote this book as an intergenerational exploration. I feel as if the period has been romanticized, criticized, and generally misunderstood, but that it left a permanent mark on who we are as a country. And I wanted to explore that and try to understand the 60s and the change that took place then through the prism of this year and through the personal stories of the people who experienced that year.
Yeah, well, you certainly pulled it off. I mean, those 100 interviews, when you must have thought your ears were going to fall off, have personal voices and personal stories that have never been told before. You do bring out, and here's where I think you deserve the most kudos, the ambiguity, the ambivalence, the irony of that whole period, because you're absolutely right. Some people do, a great many people, many young people, romanticize it. I think a lot of the following for Bernie Sanders were romanticizing what the 60s and 70s, by which they really mean the year you focused on, what it was about. And then there are others of us, largely but not exclusively, women and people of color, who want to say, yeah, not so much. Hang on there for a minute. And and yet we're glad to have, obviously to been part of it, but still it was not. And to bring out all of those nuances and do so fairly, you're a hell of a good journalist.
Well, thank you, Robin. Stories like your stories were what brought this book alive. And I write in the book, or I don't write, you told me, and I put it in the book, your amazing story of writing a piece of journalism called Goodbye to All That.
Yeah.
When you and a group of women took over an underground newspaper in 1969, the Rat Subterranean News, and you wrote this incredibly bold and angry screed against the white male New Left, which Michael Kazin, a SDS member at the time and now a historian, told me he thought that Goodbye to All That became as widely known as any document by a woman radical since the 1848 Declaration of Seneca Falls.
Wow. Well, that makes my day. But it's never done, because then during the primary 8 years ago, when Obama and Hillary were battling each other in the primary, and there were enormous sexist comments lobbed at her by the media, by everybody, I wrote Goodbye to All That too. And so
right,
I think,
exactly.
One has to keep reminding oneself that it ain't over till it's over, and it'll never, in a sense, be over, because, we have to keep vigilance going, particularly with regard to sexism, because even your most radical brothers on the left, and certainly the men on the right, are not necessarily the friends of women. So, and that comes out, the birth of this contemporary wave of feminism you deal with, the ironies over race and racism within SDS, and so many other things. I mean, the emergence of violence, which was then going to be the weather people in the 70s. It's just an extraordinarily rich, dense tapestry, and yet so readable. I mean, I was there, and there were things I learned from your book that I hadn't known.
I love that, because I did sense that people were living in their own mini revolutions in their towns and cities, and were a little bit siloed. And I wanted to show how broad this movement was, and how when you combine civil rights with counterculture and then the anti-war movement, and right. That was such a incredibly rich mix of change. And I almost felt as if people had different callings, that the events of the times were so dramatic and required reaction in so many different ways, and depending on who you were, where you lived, what your talents and proclivities were, you reacted to it a different way. Mm-hmm. So whether you were a communard, living in Oregon, you were a weatherman bombing a townhouse in the West Village, you were making your own statement. And so many people were making very different statements, but in reaction to the same, history.
Yes, precisely. And sometimes that geopolitics worked in the other direction. When Goodbye to All That, number one, that is, came out and named names of men in the left and the New Left who had been profoundly sexist. In any event, since I named names, the leftist press couldn't avoid picking it up, because women glommed onto it immediately and made it their sort of anthem. So they picked it up, but depending on where you were in the country, I
love that part.
They expurgated their local group of men, and I can laugh about it now, but I have to tell you, at the time, wow, way to go.
Well, I mean, at the time, and you told me that this was an incredibly dramatic experience for you.
Yeah.
To decide to out these men who you had, fought with in Mississippi and fought with in New York City, trying to achieve justice, and then eventually by the end of the 60s realized realized that they were hypocrites, and that the very freedom that you had been, hoping to achieve with them as your comrades, they were not willing to give to you.
Right. Well, that was the heartbreak.
It was such a betrayal.
Yeah, that was the heartbreak, because we expected that from right-wing men. But we didn't expect it from what we thought were our brothers, How long did this actually take you, Sal?
Well, it took me about 4 years. I spent 3 years solidly interviewing, traveling. I traveled all over the country, tracking people down. I interviewed people you've heard of course, like Daniel Ellsberg and Jane Fonda and Ralph Metzner, Bernadine Dorn,
and Bill Ayers,
and Mark Rudd, and those are the weather underground, and then many people who people have not heard of, but who had fascinating stories. I mean, for example, there was a moment on May 9th when Nixon arrived at the Lincoln Memorial at dawn on his own with just one aide and one Secret Service officer, and he wanted to talk to all of the young people who were convening for a massive anti-war protest after Kent State. And he talked to a woman named Laura Krause, who was just there from Detroit with her friends, and they were photographed together, and that became an iconic photograph. And I found Laurel, whose life was actually changed by that moment. She lost her job as a social worker because she was outed as a hippie, and then ended up moving to Berkeley and living in a commune and becoming a lesbian and becoming a alternative therapist. So people like that, I was interested in hearing how their lives had been changed by the times.
It's a terrific book. I congratulate you. The book is called Witness to the Revolution, Radicals, Resistors, Vets, Hippies, and the Year America Lost Its Mind and Found Its Soul, by Clara Bingham. And for young people who want to know what your inheritance and your history and herstory really is in this country, it's the book to read. And for those of us who were there, it will teach you things you never knew and remind you of what you always knew for the best. So thanks again for the book and for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
It's time for one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be right back with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again to some fighting words. This is about the media again. This time, about the media taking itself seriously before we can. On a previous episode, I quoted Leslie Moonves, the head of CBS, which was once the gold standard in TV news, as saying that he knew the wall-to-wall coverage of Donald Trump was unfair, bad for America, and bad for democracy, but it was sure great for CBS, in that it drove up ratings and consequently raised prices that CBS could charge advertisers for airtime. Similarly, Jeff Zucker, that's Zucker, CNN's boss, has for years been close to Trump, according to former congressman and now host of MSNBC's Morning Joe program, Joe Scarborough. Scarborough, a Republican himself, calls Zucker a Trump enabler, and he claims that Trump and Zucker are, quote, very close, and that Zucker personally calls Trump to book him, so much so that Trump refers to Zucker as his personal booker, and laughs. Scarborough adds, Trump hasn't said that publicly, but he has said it to me, and now I've said it publicly, close quote. I raise this now because CNN has contracted with former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski to be one of its pundits. There were outraged protests from their news department and from viewers, and those protests should not only continue but escalate. This is a stupid, despicable decision on the part of Zucker. CNN has engaged Lewandowski, who coined the Trump phrase, lying, dishonest media, who roughed up reporters at Trump rallies, who even was charged with battery against one reporter, Michelle Fields, although the charge was dropped, but it was neither withdrawn nor denied. Lewandowski's hostility to the press is well known, and it's not as though he has anything to offer. He signed both a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement agreement with Trump. So any pretensions that he can lend insight into the workings of Donald's disordered brain are non-starters. All he can do is give blind praise trumpeting Trump, and all the networks, cable and otherwise, already have sufficient mortified Republicans and sufficient former reality TV show cast members to perform that questionable duty. Lewandowski really belongs at fact-free Fox News, which has its own problems since Gretchen Carlson, a high-profile Fox anchor, just announced she's suing Fox chairman Roger Ailes for sexual harassment and firing her when she rejected him sexually. Several other women reportedly stand ready to testify about similar experiences with Ailes, so we'll stay on this story, especially since Ailes is infamous for his fierce retaliation and dirty tricks. By the way, Lewandowski has his own history of dirty tricks and unsavory associations. While working for Ohio Republican Congressman Bob Ney, who was sentenced on federal corruption charges arising from the Abramoff scandal, Lewandowski brought a loaded handgun in a laundry bag into the Longworth House office building. Yeah. He was arrested, but he claimed it was an accident because he forgot the gun was in the bag when he put the laundry in it. Honest to God. Because he was working for a congressman, the charges eventually were dismissed, but Lewandowski then unsuccessfully fought for 4 years to get the gun back, incredibly filing lawsuits in multiple District of Columbia courts and federal courts. Later, Lewandowski worked for the Koch brothers-backed advocacy group Americans for Prosperity, where even other Koch employees described him as provoking fiery confrontations and his term there as tumultuous. Manhandling journalists, race-baiting, using ethnic slurs and anti-Semitic remarks, these have dogged him for years, so it isn't surprising that he now uses his new CNN perch to defend Trump having tweeted an anti-Semitic meme picked up from a white supremacist website. Lewandowski scoffed at criticisms of that as being, political correctness. But here's the thing. A democracy depends on an informed electorate, which relies on accurate information, which in turn depends on a free press. In the disastrous Brexit decision in the UK, now much regretted by the UK, it seems that the informed electorate wasn't so informed. 66% of the people who left school at age 16 voted to leave the European Union. 71% of those with university degrees voted to remain. When did the Brits start thinking education was a bad thing? Most chillingly, the day after the exit referendum results came in, the most Googled questions online in Britain were, 1. What does it mean to leave the EU? And 2. What is the EU? This is shocking and appalling, but not surprising, because the media had not been doing its job to educate people. Yellow sheet journalism tabloids had fed the fires of isolationism and bigotry, and the more responsible press had not stepped up convincingly either. Now, here at home, since when has it been cool to be ignorant? Responsible, accurate, informative, good journalism is the lifeblood of the Republic. We need facts, not fiction, reality, not reality TV. We do not need Corey Lewandowski pontificating regularly and odiously as a political expert on CNN of all places. It's an insult to our intelligence. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter. You can tweet at Jeff Zucker CNN, JEFFZUCKER CNN, at Jeff Zucker CNN, and be sure to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.